All right, everyone, we're live on Facebook. Shantae, I'm going to make you the host of this meeting.
Can everyone hear me? All right, this is Shantae. Thank you all for being a part of this and welcome to our 30th, the 30th celebration or 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is a Facebook Live, which All Voting is Local, as well as the Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition is co-hosting. And we have a phenomenal group of panelists whom will have this conversation with us around the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as the impact on voting rights here specifically in the state of Wisconsin. This particular event will have captioning as well as an ASL interpreter. We are asking if you have questions, if you're tuning in with us live via Facebook, please put your questions right there in the chat or the chat there on Facebook, as well as if you are tuning in with us via Zoom, you can put your questions right here in the chat box. We're going to jump right in. I'm going to share just who our panelists are, as well as my co-host, and then I will give everyone the opportunity to introduce themselves. One other word of caution, maybe I should say, is if we can, before we speak, introduce ourselves or state our name so that those whom may not necessarily be able to hear what it is that we're saying, those whom are deaf, they will be able to follow us on the screen. So again, this is Chante Nelson. I have with me Miss Barbara Becker, who is from Disability Rights Coalition in Wisconsin, as well as Wisconsin Disability Rights. And then we have three phenomenal panelists. We have Danita Jackson, who is the intake specialist with Disability Rights Wisconsin. We have Katie Smith, which she is the past president of the Wisconsin Association of Deaf. And we have Chris Wood, board member of the Wisconsin Board of People with Development Disabilities. So I am going to allow Barbara to just maybe share a word or two about why this is important for her. You're muted, Barbara.
Thank you, Shantae, for the warm welcome, and Disability Rights Wisconsin and the Disability Vote Coalition are so happy to partner with All Voting is Local and with our tremendous panelists to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's such a meaningful aspect of the civil rights movement for people with disabilities. Voting is one of our nation's most fundamental rights and a hallmark of our democracy. But for too long, many people with disabilities were excluded from this important constitutional right. We've made some significant progress, and it's important to celebrate that. But I think you'll hear today from our panel members that we still need to roll up our sleeves and get to work because barriers remain. So I'll turn it back over to Shantae to begin the discussion today with our first question. And I'm looking forward to hearing from and learning from these three tremendous advocates.
Thank you, Barbara. This is Shantae again. I am going to ask the question of, we will just go in this order. So once one person ends, the other person can chime in. So in this particular order for this question, I will ask first the answer from Danita, and then Katie, and then Chris. And the question that I would love to present to you all is, why is it important for you as an individual to vote? Ms. Danita.
Hello, my name is Danita, and I feel it's important as an individual, as a woman, as an African-American, and as someone who is also blind to vote, because we need to have our voices heard. That is the best way I feel we can individually make change, and start out local, and it can go systemically and hopefully nationally. So I feel it's very important that we speak our, we say what we want, and a great way to do it is to vote.
Thank you. This is Shantae again, Katie.
Hello, I'm Katie. Voting is very important to me as an individual, because as an individual, I want my future to be wonderful. Meaning, the elected officials need to work for us because we actually pay our taxes to support them. So we need to choose and elect the right people so that the disability community in general can be supported, including the deaf community, hard of hearing, deaf blind, which happens to be the community that I'm part of. So that's why voting is important. Even though our community is quite small, we still have a loud voice.
Hello, I'm Chris, and the reason why I think voting is important is because, like the other panelists have said, it's the only way to really speak as one collective voice to create change. And also, if voting wasn't important, they wouldn't be trying to take or suppress the vote, particularly in African American and underprivileged communities. So, I mean, even when it's more difficult for folks with disabilities to vote, it's really important that we all band together so we can create social change.
This is Shantae. Thank you all. I really do agree with all that our panelists have conveyed. It is so important. We often have this whole thing about your vote is your voice, and it really is our voice when it comes to democracy. And so, Barbara, I think I'll share this space with you. If you have questions, you can chime in as well.
Right. Thank you, Shantae. Our next question, which I'm going to ask in just a minute, is going to talk about why the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is important to each of our panelists. But I just wanted to share a few comments about the ADA first. As an advocate for voting rights, it's so important to know about the different laws that are fundamental to supporting our right to vote. And there are a number of them that address voting rights for people with disabilities. Some of the areas that the ADA addresses include ensuring that state and local governments make sure that people with disabilities have a full and equal opportunity to vote. In addition to that, there's a requirement that they provide accessible voting systems. For example, each polling place is required to have an accessible voting machine where individuals with disabilities can vote privately and independently. And the ADA requires that those are properly maintained, that they're not just sitting in your polling place, but that they're turned on and that they're working correctly. The ADA also requires that people with disabilities can access and use their voting facilities. So that accessibility issue is very important. So I'm really interested in hearing from each of you on the panel why the ADA is important to you and what aspect of voting rights it particularly addresses that's important to you and others who you advocate with and for. Let's start with Katie this time.
The ADA is important because it provides for equal access for everyone, but that's only in theory. In theory, it's supposed to provide equal access. We still have a lot of work yet to do to address that issue. The idea of equal access and equal opportunity. It's there in writing and it's very clear. So for example, here we have an interpreter here for us. So that's one example of access that provides for participation in this type of community event. Whereas before there was no provision for that. We used to have to use volunteer interpreters or people who were interpreting who did not get paid for their work. So we have to pay now for communication access, and we'd have to pay for that in order for it to work for us, in order to have equal access to employment opportunities, enhanced life experience for people in the deaf community. For example, if you want to go to dog training or something, an interpreter should be there. So this type of everyday life activity, if you want to attend the theater, we have to have access. So that's one of the wonderful provisions in the ADA, without which we wouldn't have that equal access and equal opportunity.
Yeah. Katie, thanks for your advocacy. Let's go to Chris now. Chris, same question.
Okay. I first learned about how important the ADA was with regard to voting the first time I went into a voting booth in 2006. They're supposed to, as you say, have an accessible voting machine, but the accessible voting machine that they had was rickety and didn't work properly. So they got a little bit of a nice earful from me. And because it's kind of embarrassing when you're 18 and you have to have your parents go in there and cast a ballot for you. And besides that, the able-bodied voting booths aren't exactly big enough to fit an electric wheelchair in there along with another person. So it was a very interesting experience, but luckily for me, it only took one time. And my city here in Eau Claire was very receptive to the change. I mean, they had to be, but they were very receptive. They even had the poll workers go in there for a 2-day training on how to run it properly, so it didn't screw up again the next election. So it's been working fine ever since. And the poll workers they look for me, so they know they got 3 or 4 people ready to man the machine now.
Chris, thank you so much for sharing that experience. And I think it's a great reminder to all of us how the voice of one advocate can really make a difference. And you've made a difference in your community, and maybe others will follow your example.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's very empowering, but it again, it takes, you have to really be persistent. I must have had to call 2 or 3 times to make sure they were working on it.
Excellent. Well, your persistence paid off, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Great work. Danita, we'd love to hear from you. Can you talk a little bit about why the ADA is important for you as a voter?
It's important to me, and this is Danita speaking. I feel the ADA is important to me as when it comes to voting, because it allowed for the accessible voting machines where they actually read off the ballots for me and I can answer and it's all speaking to me. Before then, I've had to vote using assistance from people, and sometimes I didn't vote because I didn't just want a total stranger marking my ballot for me. And so it's really important because it's important when you say the ADA and you have something to back you up and a recourse in case something doesn't happen. I used an accessible machine at the last primary, and it was there, but there was no headphones, so I couldn't hear what was said on the screen. So I did follow protocol, talk to the chief, and the chief hit the name of it. But it was an interesting experience because I've had a couple of experiences, one good, and that wasn't so great. And I ended up having to use someone sighted to help me. Thankfully, my niece was with me, but it's just important to have that ADA, have the laws in writing we can refer to and point to. So we're just not coming out of something out of out of the sky saying this is our right, but we don't have anything stating this truly is our right. So I appreciate the door opened for me in regards to voting independently.
Yeah. Thank you for those eloquent comments, Danita. That's a really compelling example of why the ADA is so important and why continued advocacy is still needed. I'll turn it over to Shantae now. This is Barbara.
Thank you. This is Chante Nelson. I just want to take a moment and again say thank you to everyone who is joining us by both Zoom as well as Facebook Live, as well as remind everyone that we do have closed captioning. You would simply need to share at the bottom of your screen. You can turn that on. In addition to that, we do have an ASL interpreter who is interpreting as we talk. If you have questions or you have comments and you are joining us via Facebook Live, please put your questions right there in the Facebook Live video. If you are joining us via Zoom, please feel free to put your questions or comments in the chat. I'll say this as well, if you are joining us via Facebook Live, I do want to share that the captions are delayed. So if you find that that is not beneficial to you, we can absolutely, I think Peter is manning, or Peter is monitoring, I should say, the Facebook Live, and we'll put the link in the live. So if you'd like to chime in via Zoom, we can feel free to do that as well. And then I'll go on to our next question is, again, this is Chante. And so the thing that I think about is there are a lot of challenges to voting, specifically in Wisconsin, but as it relates to those whom have disabilities. And we know that there have been challenges over the last 30 years. And I want to take a moment to, because this is a celebration of the 30 years, I want to take a moment to highlight some improvements, like what are some voting rights progresses, some things that have been made, right? Well, how have we progressed in voting rights, in your opinion, over this time frame? Are there things that you can look at now and celebrate? And I'll start with Chris, and then we'll go to Danita, and then we will go to Katie. So what are, some examples of progress in voting rights as we celebrate this 30th year anniversary?
Well, as I alluded to a moment or two ago, the quality of the accessible voting machines, if they're working properly, have gotten a lot better. I mean, they really, the technological advancements, I can stick my own ballot in there. I can, manage the screen okay. And it's just been really, just in the last even 10 years, there's been more awareness. And not only, it goes to my theory that if we focus on universal design with disabilities in mind, it benefits so many other people, because I remember an elderly person coming up to me the last time I voted, telling me, well, it's nice to have these things here. She was 87 years old and couldn't hardly see a ballot. So she put the headphones on and it was able to read it for her. So, these changes that we've made in accessible voting don't just benefit folks with disabilities, but anybody that may need them.
Thank you, Chris. Danita, if you want to chime in, this is Chante again.
Well, I'm gonna get on those accessible voting machines again. It's been wonderful to use them. And I think it's important that because it's there, other people are watching and they're seeing the changes the ADA has influenced on voting, and how independent and someone who has a disability can be with another aspect of their life, which is exercising their right to vote. So while I'm sitting there, I'm sure I got everybody's attention, but it works well. And it's kind of like a promo, and it's an advocacy tool itself, just to be able to go in there and use it and show that we can do things. We're not helpless and we have a voice. And I think that will stick with people. So that's the biggest thing that I just like, the fact that it's showing everybody that we are independent and we do have a voice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Katie?
Yes, voting in the deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind community will always be a challenge. It will always continue to be a challenge, and it still is. There is one voting requirement in specific, in particular, that we're talking about that's written into the law, which says that you must verbally state your name and your address. And that is still a challenge. So even though there was a new law that passed last year, AB 168, AB 168 says that if I'm a person just for myself, I can designate somebody else to speak for me if I'm a deaf person. And so that is, the deaf community can do that, but we're not comfortable with that. So it's a little bit of progress, but it's a very small step. So we do need to establish a better system for that, because we still feel that the sense of disempowerment because of the idea that we have to designate someone to speak on our behalf. But we're still preserving our voting rights. So that is the good, that's a positive aspect of that. At least our right to vote was not taken away. And also another part of progress through ADA and through also more media attention and captioning and use of deaf people in the role of advocate and so forth, is that when we do enter the polling place, the worker can see that we're deaf and they already know something about being culturally sensitive to that. And I've experienced them being more willing to be flexible, and they're definitely more personable than they were before in terms of treating me as a person. So I think that's because of the media exposure that people have become more aware and more comfortable. So I think that's one of the positives that has come out of this.
That is a really good point. Thank you. I'm sorry, this is Shantae again, Chante Nelson. That is a really good point, Katie, that you bring out. Just the whole, I don't want to call it a revelation because it's not necessarily for all of us a revelation, but for some it might be, that whole component of not being able to use your own voice to state your name and your address, and how it disempowers you from being able to speak on your behalf, as well as I know that we look at some of the ways that things have progressed, and all three of you all brought up very real ways of progression. And although we know that there's so much more work to do, we would like to celebrate the work that all of us within this community have done to even move the needle that small bit, because it is very challenging when you are sometimes dealing in this particular space, right? So thank you all for the work that you do. Let's start there, and then thank all of you whom are listening and tuning in for the work that you do concerning this as well. I want to give way for or space for additional questions, but I did see a question in the chat box, and the question was, in light of the COVID pandemic, many organizations are encouraging people to vote absentee this election season. Is this message, I should say, getting out to individuals who have disabilities? And if so, how? And I will question to Barbara.
Thank you so much, Chante. This is a great question. This is Barbara Beckert with Disability Rights Wisconsin and the Disability Vote Coalition. Voters with disabilities do tend to vote absentee at a higher rate in regular times and during the pandemic, because so many people with disabilities are at higher risk of COVID-19. There's really a public health imperative to vote absentee. So the Disability Vote Coalition has created a new fact sheet about absentee voting. It's on our website at disabilityvote.org, because a lot of people with disabilities may not be able to go out and attend outreach events or voter registration events as they would have in the past. We're doing more through other kinds of strategies. So for example, we are doing training for providers, personal care providers, managed care organizations and others. We trained 500 providers in the month of July. They are working directly with people with disabilities, and we're encouraging them to help voters to get that absentee ballot application in. And it can be a complicated process. A lot of people with disabilities are non-drivers. They may not have a driver's license. So having the photo ID that's required for voting can be another challenge. So good question.
Barbara, you can go ahead. I think you may have another question as well. I'm sorry.
All right, great. I will move on to.
Can I comment on that? I'm sorry. This is
Sure,
Danita.
Yes, Danita, please do.
Okay, so they are requiring absentee ballots, but a person like me who is blind cannot use those absentee ballots independently. So I'm making the choice to go ahead and go in masked up and gloved up or whatever we need to do to use that machine, because I have to get someone to help me fill it out, mail it, and it's not accessible for people who are visually impaired. So I'm glad that the Wisconsin Coalition for the Blind, Wisconsin Council for the Blind rather, is working on making a screen reader accessible ballot, but it's not going to be available yet. So it's a challenge for people who are blind or visually impaired, who are not able to fill out those absentee ballots. They didn't think that far ahead. So I'll be going in person to an early voting site and getting mine in, and just have to hope things go well,
Thank you so much for raising that point, Danita. And our agency, Disability Rights Wisconsin, actually has a pending lawsuit right now trying to require the state to ensure that an accessible absentee ballot will be available for voters with disabilities, so that voters like you and many others have the ability to cast an absentee ballot privately and independently. So we'll see what happens. We're hoping that that option will be available for you for the November election, but we'll see what happens in the courts. Well, that's maybe a good transition for our next question, which is about challenges that remain for voters with disabilities. Should we transition to that now, Shantae? All right, excellent. So that's an area that we really wanted to get your perspective on today. As we've heard, the ADA has led to a lot of progress. And one area we didn't touch on is the requirements for accessibility in polling places. DRW actually goes out on election day on behalf of the Election Commission, and we do audits of polling places to ensure they're accessible. And while there's still room for improvement, there's been a lot of progress in the 30 years since the ADA was passed. But speaking of improvement, we'd like to hear from each of our panelists about the challenges that remain for voters with disabilities. Would you like to kick us off, Chris? I think you're still muted there.
One thing that I've haven't heard anybody raise as yet is that, for non-drivers, it could be a challenge in a non-pandemic time if you want to cast a ballot in person to get transportation to the ballot box, especially if you're in rural areas. So, and I think that, I think that, like you say, the accessibility of polling places, there's been a lot of progress in that. But like I say, I'm very lucky because my community is very accommodating, and I have people, and not only people, but community members that are willing to take me to the polls. So I'm very lucky.
Yeah, great point, Chris. Transportation continues to be a huge concern since so many people with disabilities are non-drivers.
Yeah.
So people would, in normal times, would like the option to be able to go to their polling place, but may not have the right to do so because of access to transportation being a problem. So thanks for raising that concern.
Yes.
Katie, would you like to address the question about the challenges that continue?
Certainly. I can think of 3 challenges that are still left. Media exposure in terms of the candidates who are running for office. It's always a challenge because on the national level, the information tends to be more accessible because there's more funding provided to pay interpreters or captioners to create accessibility. So in order to get an idea of what their platforms are, that's pretty much taken care of. But on the local level where the budgets tend to be smaller, they don't have the resources or the budget to pay interpreters to provide accessibility, which means that I might not be caught up on what their platforms are, what they stand for. And that's an issue because as a voter, how am I supposed to know who I would wish to vote for in that case? And the second challenge I see is in terms of ASL. English is a second language it's a first language for, ASL is our first language and English is a second language for many members of the deaf community. Which means that if we're trying to access material that's written in English, not many members of the deaf community are going to be able to fully access that. It may create misunderstandings or just not comprehending. So there's not a lot of material available in our language. To have that available at the polling place would be greater accessibility. And as I just mentioned earlier, the third one is that I'm frustrated by the idea of having to have someone speak for me, to speak my name and my address, and don't want to have somebody doing that for me because it is still very disempowering for us and many, not just me, but many deaf people. So that's what many of us will experience when we go to try to vote. So those are 3 of the challenges that I can see and these are things that we definitely have to apply ourselves to create more equal access.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Those are excellent recommendations. Danita, I wanted to circle back to you now, and you've already given some great input, but give you another kick at the can here about speaking to the continuing challenges.
Well, I think just a continuing challenge is for people to go out and access and use these machines if they really need it, because I feel like if it counts when we use these machines and when we exercise our right using the accessible options. And if we don't use them, then I'm not gonna say they're gonna go away, but we need more. So I know how easy it is to have someone bring you, and someone I think should, if you could get someone to bring you when you're visually impaired to vote, to navigate all of the structural situations when you go into a voting place or whatever, but try to use the accommodations, make extra time because they need to be used. And if we don't use them, I'm not gonna say we're gonna lose them, but it would be nice to have more than one or have one at every place. And if people are not using what is out there, they may not see as much of a need as they should to make them accessible for us. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danita. You're really a powerful spokesperson for the accessible voting machines. And maybe there's an opportunity for the Disability Vote Coalition to invite you to help us with that, because we've got to get the message out there and you do it so well. Thank you. Turn it back to Shantae now.
Oh yeah, I was going to chime in and just say I agree with that. It has been, I mean, I can hear the passion in just all 3 of our panelists as they speak. And I know that we're talking about challenges, and I just wanted to kind of throw this question out there. In the midst of COVID, what would you say some of the challenges are? We are in a time now where we are all still in the midst of a pandemic, and I would just like to find out from you all, what do you consider to be some challenges during COVID that maybe was or was not a challenge post or pre-COVID? And I'll just start with Danita, if that's okay, and then we'll go to Katie and then Christopher.
Just getting past the worry of getting COVID. And for me, I mean, it's like I go in there and it's just like everybody else. You just, just to be masked up and gloved up and whatever. And it's challenging, and you're already concerned about the potential of getting it, taking that chance to go in person and do it. And then you have to worry, hopefully the machines will be accessible and working, and they'll have all the parts needed to use those machines. So I'm praying that everything is gonna be working out okay. And I've been fine so far. I've been doing everything I needed to do. So I'm just gonna have faith that I'm gonna walk in and out COVID free and have exercised my rights at the same time.
Thank you for sharing, Danita. I appreciate that. Katie?
Yes, we have a very big barrier with COVID, and that is the mask itself. The mask is a barrier to communication, no matter how you slice it, because you can't see through it. So that means that we're not able to read lips, and many deaf people do rely on lip reading for communication. And so that's so people tend to, use that for their communication at the polling place. So with the mask and limited access to that, it's basically communication option that's taken away. So that means they are stuck writing back and forth, which requires pen and paper, which is a transmission device for the virus. It also means that you have to come closer to the person that you're writing back and forth with. So there's a higher risk of coming in contact with the virus for many deaf people. So a deaf person will experience many different types of barriers if they have to go into the polling place in person, during the time of COVID, and those are some of them.
Thank you for sharing those. Again, this is Chante Nelson. Chris, we're gonna turn it over to you for your answer to this question.
Well, I suppose the biggest barrier generally for me is that this pandemic has laid bare the caregiving crisis that we have got. Because I'm lucky because I've had the same caregiver for 7 years, but if he's sick, I don't have anybody else because my parents have to work. So, and the people that I did have didn't want to come out when there was lockdown. So that really, the barrier there was exposed twofold there. And the barrier with voting for me is the fact that I don't feel very comfortable going to a crowded voting place at the moment, which is too bad because I love to, communicate with the polling workers, and I find voting to be one of the most powerful type of things, especially at the ballot box. So to do it absentee kind of takes a little bit of the luster off of it for me, but I will do it. I enjoy it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think we have one final question, and then I'll give we'll see if we have any questions that have to be answered and if we can squeeze those in. And then at the conclusion, I'll give each panelist the opportunity to share maybe some last words and say some goodbyes before we end our time together.
Thanks, Chante. This is Barbara again. So our next question to our panelists is kind of looking forward. 10 years from now, when we celebrate the 40th anniversary of the ADA, what do you hope the world will look like for people with disabilities? I think that this time we'll go in reverse order, maybe start with Chris.
What do I hope that the world will look like in 10 years? Well, I hope that there are more accessible doors on buildings. I really do. I think that is one of the biggest barriers yet, because I don't care how positive your attitude is, it's not going to help open the door. So, and having to ask at every time you need to go in some place that doesn't have a handicap accessible door, it gets a little bit tiring after a while. So I hope we can have more accessible doors, and you know, I hope we can maybe make some more recreational activities more accessible. We're working well on that with beaches and lakes and rivers. I mean, they're just putting an accessible pier in our local community here so we can do some fishing. But I hope we have more recreational opportunities available in 10 years.
Yeah, I love your vision. Thank you, Chris. Danita, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I would like to see, because I come from a background of employment, that more people with disabilities are out working and that employers are becoming more open to providing accommodations for people who have disabilities, because we are a valuable part of the workforce. So I would like to see the unemployment rate go up due to employers becoming more open to hiring people with disabilities. And the ADA does make that possible if with accommodations. So
Yeah, thanks, Danita. That's an excellent recommendation. Katie, give us your perspective.
This is Katie. And my perspective is what I'm hoping for within the next 10 years is that we will see growth in the use of technology, meaning we will have ballots and electronic ballots that we can fill out rather than paper, and speaking ballots for the blind and signed access so that everyone can have equal access to it. I don't want to have to designate somebody, just like one designated place just for people with disabilities. I want everything to be accessible for all, like universal design. So when you go in, you don't feel like there's special treatment happening. You have to go to a special booth. And as Danita pointed out, employment too in the deaf community, unemployment is on the rise. And so hoping to see an increase in employment over the next 10 years for the deaf community and see growth in companies' willingness to hire deaf, hard of hearing and deaf blind people in their workplace. And similarly to what Chris mentioned, I would also like to, one moment, the screen froze. As Chris pointed out, about recreational opportunities, I would like to see that become more accessible for the deaf community as well, with the expanded use of technology to help us access more recreational opportunities such as movie theaters. And then hopefully there'll be more options in movie theaters, for example, with open captioning and other things of that nature. And I also hope that the media, everything in the media will be fully captioned, because right now we don't have that. So hopefully the accessibility in terms of accessing media will also improve over the next 10 years.
Thank you, Katie. I hope we have all this recorded because I want to go back and get all these recommendations and come back in 10 years and see where we are.
Yes, absolutely. This is absolutely great. Thank you all for sharing such great information. Thank you, Barbara, for co-hosting this with me. I want to just make the offer for anyone. I'm sorry, this is Chante Nelson. I did not say that, you all. My apologies. I want to make our offer space for anyone who may have a story specifically or particularly to maybe photo ID or one of these barriers. If you'd like to share that information, if you can just let myself or Barbara know, one of the panelists, if you know them, we can absolutely help you to capture your story around some of these challenges, as well as some of the things that have been beneficial to you as part of this particular act. I am going to try to find out if we have questions, and I know we are pretty much wrapping up and coming up to time. And I want to say this: if there are questions that we don't get to, if we have a large amount of them, we could absolutely put something together that is like a question and answers and get those questions back out to you all. Barbara, if you can check within our chat to see if we have questions. And Peter, I know you are chiming in, but if you will let me know if there are questions. I think he's texting me. While we do that, look at questions, I am going to, you have questions, Barbara?
Yes, there actually is a great question for the panelists asking, is there anything that we can do to advocate for and with individuals that have disabilities to our communities when it comes to voting rights? So an opportunity, maybe each panelist could give a quick response if they have a suggestion. Can we fit that in, Shantae?
We can. And then I see a raised hand also in amongst the attendees. But yes, if we can maybe a quick.
All right, great. Danita, do you want to start us off? Do you have a request for community allies who would like to support increased access for voters with disabilities?
Right to our legislators, you know, and I know we've heard this a lot, if you see something, say something, but that's really important because if you see something that doesn't look right or ask a question to the chief at the voting location, they'll at least make them aware that someone is looking and taking note of what's maybe a technical issue that would impact someone with a disability to be able to vote.
Yeah, great points. Thank you, Danita. Katie, any recommendation you'd like to share?
Yes, basically for allies, you know, work with us to set an example. So if you see a person using inappropriate language, for example, our community, we call ourselves deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind, but often we hear people saying hearing impaired. So just as allies, it's your job to increase awareness that our community self-identifies as deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind, not hearing impaired. So that very simple act of just conveying the right information and making sure that that's out there in the public, that exposure and just being able to expose people to correct information about identity is just really key at making some of those connections to different parts of the community. You know, just more awareness of cultural sensitivity and so forth. Another thing is it's also very important for people to realize that sensitivity is important, to be sensitive, culturally aware. If there's something you don't understand or you don't know, then approach the person. You know, maybe I'm not an expert in, you know, the field of blindness or something, but approach a person from that community. So if you want to ask about a culture related to the deaf community or the blind community, you know, if it's a blind question, I would refer that to Danita. If it's a question about the deaf community, it would be something for me. So, you know, I'm not an expert in building access, so I might refer that question out to somebody within that community. So it's important for people to be aware of who has expertise in a particular subject, you know, and approach that person to discuss those issues.
Thanks for always helping us know how to be more respectful and inclusive, Katie. I've learned so much from you and I'm grateful. Chris, would love to hear your insight.
Well, the only, I don't have much to add to what Katie said, but the only thing that I would add is to understand that your legislators work for you. So if you're advocating on behalf of disability policy and more people call the legislators and tell them that it's important, they will put it on their radar, because sometimes disability policy kind of gets sent to the bottom of the heap sometimes. So if you have more, if you raise awareness with the people in power, that would really make a huge impact on the disability community.
That's great. So that aligns so much with Danita's advocacy as well, and the need we have right now for an accessible absentee ballot. So that's certainly one thing community members could do, is to share that as a priority with their elected officials. So thank you all for those wise words. Turn it back over to Shantae.
Yes, thank you all. This is Chante Nelson. Thank you all for sharing that. I'm not sure, we don't have any questions on Facebook. I'm not sure if that I see any. Wait, we have one question here. It says, I think in my opinion that showing driver's licenses is equal as the person verbally stating my name and address to a poll worker. I sure hope the law will change again in the near future. So it's not a question, but yes, a statement. We do have a very stringent photo ID law here in the state of Wisconsin. It is a challenge for every individual, no matter what your ability is, it is a challenge. And so if we can get that law changed, that would be phenomenal. However, we are in a position right now where the thing that I think is our best response to that particular law is to educate the public as much as possible, no matter what the ability is around our voting laws, until we can make some changes. As we've stated, this is a celebration of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Our 30th anniversary, like it's been 30 years since this particular law was enacted. And as a result of that, we celebrate that time and we celebrate the small advancements and hope, like Barbara, the last question that Barbara asked, maybe in 10 years, we can celebrate some larger advancements. So if we don't have any additional questions, I'm going to give an opportunity for each of our panelists to share some final words and say our goodbyes. Of course, once I end this, it will end the Facebook Live as well as our time together. And I don't want to do that without allowing us to share final words and say goodbye. So I guess I should say who's going to go, right? So Ms. Danita, can I start with you, and then I will go with Christopher, and then I will go with Katie, if that's fine. And then Ms. Barbara, I'll round us out.
I just want to say, if you can, go out and vote, absentee, in person, whatever. Our voice is important.
Thank you. And Danita, can you just close out with sharing who you're with again as well?
I'm with Disability Rights Wisconsin.
Thank you. Christopher, you're muted, but you're next.
I'm with the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. And my advice or words of encouragement is to say that everybody has a voice, and whether or not they think they can or not, they can influence legislators or political leaders just by making their voice heard. So even the smallest voice can have a tremendous impact in public policy.
Thank you, Chris. Katie.
Yes, I wanted to close with your vote does count. Maybe you think you're just one single individual and your vote isn't going to make a difference, but think how many people think that way. And how many people say, oh, I'm not going to bother voting because I'm just one person. If everybody thought that way, you would have a critical mass of people that could have made a break in the election, broken that election. So exercise your rights through voting in person or absentee. It's very important. I think this year's election is vital because many of our rights are at stake right now.
Thank you so much. Barbara?
Thank you, Shantae. And first, my heartfelt gratitude to our panelists who've done such a tremendous job today and really, I think, given us a blueprint for the issues that we need to address moving forward. You know, as we celebrate the ADA 30th, Justin Dart is often referred to as the father of the ADA. He's a very well-known disability activist. And one of his best lines was, vote as if your life depends on it, because it does. And I think that's a great reminder of how important and fundamental the vote is. So I invite everyone to join with us in this cause to ensure that people with disabilities have the right to be heard at the ballot box. Go to disabilityvote.org, get on our email list, and make common cause with us to close the gap so that people with disabilities are having the same opportunity as other Wisconsinites to make their voices heard.
Thank you. Again, this is Chante Nelson. I am the state director with All Voting is Local. I also want to join my voice and say thank you to each of our panelists. You all have provided a wealth of information and you are such a great resource. I am honored to be in this space with you all, and I say thank you for all that you have done. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you to those whom are our interpreters and our individuals whom are helping us to capture and close captioning. Thank you to those whom are helping us by monitoring the Facebook. Thank you for everyone who's helped to set this up. And I will say that one of the best things that we can do as partners in this work is to continue to, first of all, be present with each other, listen to how voting and some of the stringent limitations impact each other, be sensitive in that listening, as well as join the fight with one another. I may not understand the full impact, or someone else may not understand the full impact, but if we can stand together, I think we can change the way things are done. And I will say to everyone, if you're not aware, I want to make sure that it is known, you can request an absentee ballot should you choose to vote that way through August 6th of 2020. Of course, the election day coming up is August 11th. And if you decide that you're going to vote in person, we celebrate you in that, we support you in that. We want to say be safe, please wear protective gear. And if you have any problems or any issues on election day or leading up to the election day, you can always contact our election protection, which is 866, it's 1-866 our vote. So 1-866 OUR-VOTE. Again, thank you all for being a part of this panel. And until we meet again, you all have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Chante.
Long. Thank you very much.
This was great partnering with all of you. Really grateful, Danita, Katie, and Chris.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
All right, I'm ending it, you all. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Bye.